Welcome to my second attempt at a sort of free writing spoken word hand-in where I try to combine the hand-in with the piece itself, which I feel I can only get away with because of COVID and how this work can't be handed in any other way. I wanted to experiment. This is one of the most stressful things I've tried to make, but I really want to commit to the idea. This has been really a tough one to make, and the film itself was done in one, but this speaking part has really highlighted how difficult it is to speak non-stop for 45 minutes. So the film itself is about documenting the change that my work has undergone, and something I immediately noticed as I gathered up all the work was that there was an insane amount of paper that went unused. Sketchbooks that would fill up and then I would stop using them when an academic year ended or I found a better book that I preferred. It really bothered me. It felt very wasteful, and I didn't like how much was wasted. Some of this work is very old, and I wanted to give it new purpose. I didn't like that I still had it. It felt like it served no real purpose, and so the goal of this piece was to combine, as well as document, old work along with what I've been working over the next 6 months. I don't want to, nor do I see any reason to draw any distinction in this hand-in, even if it's obvious, because I want to experiment with the idea of art as a continual process, me as an artist as a continual piece of developing work. It seemed important to me. Rubbish as a concept and waste, I wanted this to be a performative hand-in. I like the idea of being somewhat present during the hand-in process. We will see how willing I am to commit to this idea. I'm going to try and combine what is the body of work and the research documentation in this hand-in. Again, we will see how much I commit to that. I have a loose set of notes next to me of all the things I want to cover in this film. We will see. We will see. This film was filmed in one continuous take. The voiceover will be the same thing. The plan initially was to have a sort of setup where I could do lots of invisible cuts and change the film as I saw fit. But the further I got into it, the more I liked how not chronological it was. I wanted to fuck myself up in the voiceover process, which I'm absolutely doing. It's incredibly challenging to keep up with me when I filmed this. The pacing of it is very weird. I know for a fact that I'm going to be talking about some things for longer than they're on screen. I might find that I have not a lot to say about something that's on screen for a very long time. So we will see. We've got more waste here. This is more just what I happen to have in my room at the time, as well as materials and snacks and things that I was eating or using while I was making things for this film. My camera setup is very loose. I just planted my phone on top of a stack of PlayStation games. The table that you're seeing is a canvas that I never got around to using. I did manage to get studio lights, which was great. It's just a shame I couldn't get a tripod. That would have really helped. I don't think it looks too bad. The book cover that you can see on the table is more of a framing device. I wanted that to be used as more of a marker for me. I knew that if it was on that book, it was in shot, and that's fine with me. This whole film really stems from a quote that I heard. It was in the 2019 film Leaving Neverland. Was the film about Michael Jackson and some of the allegations that were against him. It was a James L. Brooks quote where he talks about a season 7 episode called Stark Raving Dad, and how the episode has been omitted from collections of season 3. That was it. It was season 3 because of Michael Jackson's inclusion in the episode. And there's an excellent quote in response to the book burning argument that is thrown at Brooks. He said that he was against book burning of any kind, but that it was his book, their book, and that they can take out a chapter if they want to. And that is how I view this film and this process that I'm currently working through. The idea that although history is important, it's not so important that you, as the creator, can't change it or reuse it or omit it if you see it fit. Of course, I'm not on the same level as something like The Simpsons. I'm still a student. There's no guarantee that my work will be influential at all. And so the book burning argument is difficult to make because this work is not important enough to warrant that. I think that if it ever were to become that, you could more easily make that argument. But given that it's impossible to argue that this work isn't important to how I work now, I like that personal edge. I like that I'm essentially arguing with myself when I make something like this. There's no reason for me to keep this work. I didn't have to include it, yet I'm doing it anyway. And I think that's great, because I'm up my own ass. I like the idea of changing my work just by putting these question marks on what is a 10-year-old book. I have updated it and created something new. This felt like a real exercise in curation as well. The idea that the process of finding this work was probably half the trouble. It took so long to find all of this work. I knew that I had it, but we've moved house a lot. And so getting it was very difficult. But it's worth noting that the only reason I was able to get it is because I was locked down in Plymouth. This would have absolutely not been possible if I was in Canterbury. And so in that sense, I think this work is really unique. It's something that I would not have been able to do under normal circumstances. And the same goes for the submission. There would have been almost impossible to justify this in a practical setting. I would have to hand these books in, but I like the idea of a finite hand in, something that's very hard to give, because I can't just post it. I can't just give you this work. And so I feel like I can take advantage of that and present you with a series of images that go, provided you don't pause it, which I guess I can't guarantee. If you're watching this and you pause it, there's nothing I can do about that. And in the same way that once this work is handed in, if it were a practical hand-in, I couldn't control how quickly you turn the pages or which parts of the work you consider more important. You know, if that's my failing as a creative, that's fine. We will see. Lots of old research here about photography, artists that use photography and imagery to distort reality, change the way that the real world is perceived. Something that I would like to think I'm doing if I was being up my own ass. And maybe I am. Lots of that. I think another thing that's really just haunted me throughout this whole process is the idea of effort and work is run through this whole thing. I've been completely haunted by the idea of hard work, what constitutes work. I've been drawing and making throughout all of this year, and I just don't feel that I have done the work. I don't feel that I'm deserving of any grade. I don't know what constitutes a good mark at this point. And this is a purely personal thing, I think. You know, in a realist sense, I don't worry about that. I know I've put the work in, but it feels very difficult to justify, and I'm in a constant state of stress about whether or not I've done enough. A film like this is a fairly good reinforcement that I have done the work, but we will see. We will see. Speaking of work, there's a very good quote that I found when I was doing my essay on work, which loosely ties into this, and it's that it's from Santiago Sierra, whose name I hope I pronounced correctly. I'll just read the quote word for word, and we will talk about it after. Quote, "I can't change anything. There is no possibility that we can change anything with our art. We do our work because we are making art, and because we believe art should be something that follows a reality. But I don't believe in the possibility of change, not in the art context, not in the reality context." This was in 2002. There's a book called Sierra Works, 1990 to 2002. I think that, especially for me, it's a quote that resonates. I don't think that my art has the power to change anything. And I think it stopped me from making art that will change anything through the fear that I can't. And so it's a bit of a vicious cycle. I don't want to be seen as someone who tries to make change and fails. I would rather be someone that doesn't try and therefore cannot fail. I think this is something that probably applies to a lot of creatives. And I think this film is my attempt to try that. I want to try and make something unique. Even if I fail, we will see. I think the idea of art being a career has really driven this piece. I think that preservation in art is something that's taken very seriously. A lot of effort goes into preserving art, more so as an artist dies, because they're no longer in control of how their art is seen, preserved, looked after in any way. It's something that I worry about, and it's something that I spend a lot of time thinking about, because I am so present for so much of my work, and I'm lucky enough to have access to so much of it. It's very difficult to justify. I wonder how much of my work would be preserved if I died today. would the work I'm showing now and that I feel is worth showing be the stuff that people look at and go, that needs to remain? And that's an important part of this creatives process, and we need to keep it. This is a perfect example. I have a photo of this metal workpiece, and I'm able to go get the piece. Now, is it more important that I have the piece itself, or is it more important that it's documented in photographic form? Especially given that paper is almost definitely less easy to maintain than a piece of metal. I find that an interesting challenge. I have both, but would both be worth keeping from a preservation perspective? I don't know. I think time is very difficult to keep track of. I really worry that I peaked. And maybe this is an egotistical thing, I think, because I've been quite proud of work that I've made in the past. And so I wonder if that stops me progressing in any way, because I don't want to taint what has already been made. So in a lot of respects, that could be what this is. I constantly stress about tainting what has already been made. And so making a film like this, where I do that, I take work and I ruin it. Not massively, it's not a super important thing. It's not something I get super hung up on. But I do it. This is now the oldest piece of work. I know I said I wasn't going to draw a distinction in terms of dating this work, because I see it all as a modern process, but this is a piece of art I did in preschool. I put it in a dog shit bag. How witty. How clever. Well done, me. I'm gonna have to pause it. It's gonna be so easy to tell when we get to the more recent artwork, because I reckon I'm gonna talk so much more fluidly. With the older work, it's very difficult to talk because you lose track of what the work was about. It's very difficult. I always find it interesting. There's a very good quote. Let me get it while I'm recording. How about that for a fun detour? Yeah, it's a Frida Kahlo quote. And I think that this may be the best summary. It's, I am my own muse. I am the subject I know the best. The subject I want to know better. And I kind of take that to heart. I can't help but think that I am the most important part of my own artwork. And so to be conscious of the art that I am and what I make is super important. I can't ignore what I am. So we must document it. This work is so much about hindsight as well. I don't want to be embarrassed by the artist that I am. I've got to document everything. Oh, this is such a fail. We'll see. We will see. Something that I played around with a lot and unfortunately we just didn't get to a good enough point, was the idea of water, the idea of this artwork being destroyed fully with water, the idea of a diver slowly going out to sea, rediscovering this work. Nice hold on Gillian Waring there, an artist who I do admire, but not super interested in nowadays. Hey, look, even more wasted paper. Thank God I finished this sketchbook. Thanks, Gillian Waring. You ruined my thought process completely. Watch me fail now to rip these pages out. I seriously considered removing this whole segment from the video because I was embarrassed, but I couldn't do it. So you can hear me sigh with disappointment, which is, always what you want to hear from yourself. Something like this. This was hugely... We're getting into recent stuff now. 6-month territory. This is what I started with. I think a film that I watched recently was Great Wall of China, Lovers at the Brink. It's a 1989 film with Abramovich and Ule, her then husband. But I guess that's kind of the point. They didn't finish this film as a couple. It was directed by Murray Gregor. I hope I said that right. The film is about an hour long. The couple started at either end of the Great Wall of China and walked towards each other to meet in the middle. And at that point, their relationship ended. They had many troubles in their relationship, despite making a lot of art together. And I quite like the idea of a piece of art marking an end point. I think that's really tragic, and I think that it's important to document that if this is a farewell to my art. I think it's why I definitely need to follow this up with a destruction of the work, because it's quite a fun little tragedy of abandonment. Something I play around with in this particular book is the idea of leaving work behind, making work that is just inaccessible, especially within an academic context. I've never really been the type to care about grades, which has harmed me in the past. It's been something that I've had to face the consequences for, but I just really wanted to do this, and so here we are. There's a brief moment there where we look at Ai Weiwei, an artist who has clearly upset some people, most notably with the vase. It was what was it called? The Han Dynasty urn that I don't think got him banned from China, but they weren't happy with him. That piece was made in '95. Ai Weiwei's always been an activist, very anti-China, I would say, is what China would call him. I think he's very conscious of the freedom that has been taken away in that country. It's very interesting to me. I don't view academic art as restrictive as China, but I think that it does stop me personally from exploring ideas in the way that I want to, because academic art requires that you show your sources and that you document your process, which is what I'm trying to do here. But it's difficult to make that feel substantial And that's because I spend more time making, as I'm sure it's probably showing in a film like this, than I do really researching. And I think it's always been a problem. And here's the kind of the key point of this whole piece, really, which is that I don't know what constitutes a job well done anymore. It's something I really struggle with. Whether or not I tried, I really struggle with that. I almost feel like that is all that matters when it comes to a grade. Did I spend hours slaving over the work? You know, did I really struggle with it? And in this case, I would say I really did. But my worry is that a lot of that struggle was very much internalized, and that as a result, that might not translate into a grade. Which again is something that I'm not super worried about, but I would be lying if I said I didn't care about what people think. You know, the moment where I would get a grade for this work is the moment I dread the most, because I personally feel like my heart and soul went into this. But will that translate? I don't know. As I said, really just upset. This is the worst thing I've done. I hate everything about that 5 seconds. Experimenting with costumes. I really wanted this to be more performative. You know, as I said, I wanted to dive into the water, but it just didn't feel right. Didn't feel natural. So I didn't do it. Some old photos of me when I was able to visit galleries. What a wonderful novelty that was. It's becoming very clear to me that this work is so inherently negative in its outlook. I think there's a real sense of pointlessness to the art that I make at the moment, and I am okay with that. I'm perfectly comfortable with somebody looking at this and saying that is pointless. But at the same time, it upsets me, because I do want to make art that has an impact. But if it doesn't, I guess it's not something to be upset about. I think to come back to curation a little bit, there's nothing chronological about this. I kind of want to make that clear. There's a lot of this is very hard to explain. There's recreations of old work in here, as well as new work, as well as old work. It's very hard to summarize. The idea is so incredibly messy, which is why I felt that it could only really be summarized in something where you can hear my voice and you can hear how difficult it has been to summarize this work. You will get an artist statement from me, which I think is good. I think it's helped a lot in giving this work purpose, but I don't think you can tell it hasn't finalized anything, and I just need to keep going with this work. Some photos of paintings that I couldn't fit into this, so I thought it would be fun to sort of give them form in a miniature form where you can't quite see them properly. Again, playing around with the idea of documentation and how it changes your perception, because I fully had to sort of accept when submitting this work that scale is just not a factor. You take a photo of a big piece of work and it's small. There's no screen, no one has access to a screen big enough to show this work off at its correct scale. You can make a small piece of art too big, you can make a big piece of art too small. So I thought that it would be fun to sort of take advantage of the way that I make this work. The ideas of mirrors. What do you do? Even watching this now, it's stressful. Gilbert and George. What a pair of dickheads. they're artists who initially, I think, if we were just talking about their art, I would say they're a huge inspiration, but I also think they may well be textbook example of how not to behave as artists. I think it's just abysmal. I think they're terrible people. I think, oh, this is super interesting. I found a planner from when I was in year 11, which was a pretty tough time for me. I was at a school I really didn't like. I was at an all boys school, it was a grammar school, which I really wasn't set up for. Very academically driven. Art was not the top priority at this school. And there was a real sense that if you weren't exceeding expectations, then you were failing. And so it really did a number on my confidence as someone who wanted to be creative. And I was doing fine, and I think that's something that I know now. I was getting B's and C's across the board, and I didn't fail anything. I passed everything. Everything in my grades and my GCSEs were a C and above. But at the time, that felt like a failure. And that really bothers me, and I think it really shaped the person I am now. Because I spent a lot of this time stressing about marks and grades, which is something that I consciously try not to do now. There is the odd element to this where I can feel my piss poor attitude coming through in a lot of these pictures that are in this diary where I'm supposed to be documenting homework assignments. But it's a piss poor attitude that I'm quite happy is there. I cover things up. I almost treated this book as more of a sketchbook than any sketchbook I was supposed to be using at the time. I can look at a lot of these images and place myself back in the environment that I was in at the time, which was not a nice one. I can imagine sitting at the desks that I was sat at, really just hating every second of it. Being surrounded by hyper-masculine sort of ideas. Nice signature there from me, taking that. Oh, that's nice. I think the attitude is just mean. I think a lot of the best work that I've made has come from this really nasty place, really horrible sort of attitude, and I'm okay with that, but I think I've consciously tried in recent memory to improve my attitude and try to come across as a more positive person in my art. Again, success may vary. And your mileage might vary, you might disagree with me. And that's perfectly valid. Some weird sort of rogue drawings in this that I found really interesting. Here's my timetable. Bye, timetable. Was looking at a lot of Picasso prior to this. Really, I forget that he's classically trained. His old work is so technically impressive. And I think he's probably the main reason that the attitude of mastery before experimentation persists, which is really the antithesis to how we work in a modern sort of academic art sense. There's a real sort of attitude that you need to experiment before you start to hone in on your practice, which I think I don't think it's unfair to say that that's not the world that Picasso is coming from. He comes from an era in art where you picked a mastery and you had to learn that mastery before you were allowed to even consider experimentation, before your experimentation could be validated. You had to prove that you were worthy of that. And to be really blunt, I hate that. I think it adds to this horrible gatekeepy attitude. Um, I want to fight against that. This is as good a time as any to talk about Lucian Freud. Mostly one of the last paintings he ever did, which was titled Painter Working Reflection. It was painted in '93, and it's a self-portrait, like a full-body self-portrait, and it's a nude, and it's something that, well, I have a quote in front of me, so I'll read that. I felt very uneasy doing it. Seldom got so fed up with a model, but I thought after putting so many other people through it, I ought to subject myself to the same treatment. I think that this was said before he unveiled it in '93. He stated that after all his time painting people, maybe it was time that he painted himself, which is something that he'd done before, but not in this way. He'd never done a proper nude of himself. And it's him as an old man. I think there's a real sense that he feels his life slipping away from him. And it's sad, but I think it really goes back to what I was saying about curating your own work. He created a piece of work that I think it would be impossible to omit when talking about his work from start to finish. It feels like a very finalized piece. It bookends his work very nicely. And I think he knew that. Which is why I wanted to make something like this. I really struggle with the idea of documentation. At this point, I'm just showing whenever you're in an art sense, you always do crits. You get people to sort of write what they think of your work, which I kind of hate, because it almost feels impossible to get decent criticism in an art uni or an art environment. I think people are almost too open-minded for what that's worth. It's very difficult to justify being critical of someone's work, especially when you're on the same level as the person you're criticizing. If another student criticizes me, I can ignore their criticism, and I do the same thing. I feel there's a sense of like, well, what right do I have to criticize you as a creative? And so you end up just saying things like, oh, I like the colors. And I just really grew to resent that. And it's not something that's gone away yet. It doesn't happen so much with tutors. Tutors are very happy to talk shit, and I like that. But I would say that you get less communication with a tutor than you do with other students. And I think, for me, I really continue to have something of an animosity towards that environment. This book is before I applied to UCA. You can see the application there. I really wanted to, well, I made notes, what I was applying for. I quite like this as a guide. I don't think this is a guide, but initially this film was going to be framed as more of a tutorial, hence the kind of fixed camera perspective, and the idea that this would be like a DIY thing. I kind of got this idea after really just enjoying the Yoko Ono piece. It's 1961 painting To Hammer and Nail, and how that piece acts as something of a tutorial on a piece of art that you can't, or that you can recreate, provided you follow the guide. I really like the idea of I don't know if that adds value to a work or takes away from it, and I think that, maybe a fun thing to do in the future would be to try and recreate this video, put it in front of me and try to do it all again, which I know for a fact would be impossible because some of this work has already been scrunched up. It's such an ongoing process. I can't help but think that this documentation and tutorializing, and it really trivializes the work as well. Like, I'm putting up whole pages of writing for a fraction of a second. I wonder if anyone will pause it to read it. I'm going to read the tutorial that Yoko Ono wrote for Painting to Hammer a Nail. Painting to hammer a nail. Hammer a nail into a mirror, a canvas, a piece of glass, wood, or metal every morning. Also, pick up a hair that came off when you combed in the morning and tie it around the hammered nail. The painting ends when the surface is covered with nails. 1961 winter. I really am hung up on endpoints in art. I think it's very easy, or at least it was for me, to save a piece of work, an idea that I thought was really good, and to not do it until it was nearer to hand in. And I'm so glad that that's something that I've ditched. I'm really happy now to present work as I've made it, in the order that I've made it. Because I'm aware that the development is unending. There will always be more ideas, and I'm constantly making mistakes, and that's okay. I have some unopened letters that I found. Unopened for reasons of I don't know. And I will not be opening them in this, because I don't want to. I'm interested to know if any of this work will be scanned, as I'm aware that the submission asks that I scan 20 images, and I wonder if that's necessary for a piece like this where I have so much video and so much footage of this work. Whether this film counts as 20 images, is it 1,000 words? I don't know. Would it be too much, or is it too little? I don't know. And I think it's an interesting challenge. And it's part of the reason I stress so much about making a piece like this, but I almost feel an obligation to do it. Let's open this letter. I know it's already been opened because I'd written on it, but it had sealed up for some reason, which is rather odd. Now I have no idea what this is. I remember looking at it while I was filming and being genuinely confused as to what it was. I think, as I'm looking at it now, it was to do with a course that I'd applied for prior to fine art, which was to do with teaching. No, it isn't. It is art and design. So I truly have no idea. I thought the form behind it was about... It was a clearance thing, because I wanted to go into teaching. Obviously, you have to go through various checks before you go into teaching, and I thought that's maybe what that form was. But this is about art and design, so that's that idea at the window. Getting close to the end of this film, though. I just want to formally apologise to whoever has had the genuine displeasure of watching this and listening to my monotone voice explain to you what I've been doing before this hand-in. I want to say that I have been intentionally cryptic, and I really wonder how that's going to affect me. I didn't even do this drawing. What's on? I think it's safe to assume that this film is over. Thank you for watching. There you go. 7 in the evening. That clock is wrong, for the record. It was not 7 in the evening.